Now I'm very excited to introduce our keynote speaker for the afternoon. And we get two for the price of one, as they say. I'm very excited to introduce to you Naomi Feil, the founder of the Validation Training Institute, and Vicki de Klerk, who is the executive director of the Validation Training Institute. So I'm just going to quickly introduce both of the ladies, although I know that a lot of people know you both. Naomi Feil is the developer of validation. She was born in Munich in 1932 and grew up in a home for the aged in Cleveland, Ohio, where her father was the administrator and her mother the head of the social service department. This unique background gave her insight into the world of the elderly. They were her neighbors and her friends growing up. After graduating with a master's degree in social work from Columbia University in New York, she began working with the elderly. Between 1963 and 1980, Naomi developed validation as a response to her dissatisfaction with traditional methods of working with the severely disoriented old people who were her clients. In 1982, she published her first book, Validation, the Feil Method. Her second book, The Validation Breakthrough, was first published in 1993. Feil and her husband have made many films and videos about aging and validation. Since the mid-1970s, Feil has done over 900 workshops in the United States and Canada, plus almost 1,000 workshops in Europe and Asia. We also are happy to have Vicki de Klerk with us. She oversees organizational operations and is a validation master. Together with her mother, Naomi, she revised the books, Validation, the Feil Method, and the Validation Breakthrough. She's also authored Validation Techniques for Dementia Care, a family guide to improving communication, and a new workbook, Communicate with Older Adults with Cognitive Decline, Validation for First Responders. Since 1989, Vicki has given validation workshops, lectures, and training programs all around the world.
Okay. Hi, Mom. Can you see me?
I can see you and I can hear you, Vicki.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
You see me? You don't. Do you hear me?
I see you and I hear you.
Okay.
Great. Good morning, and thank you for getting up so early for this.
You're welcome. It's good to see you. It's always good to see you and hear your voice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you heard, but Kim gave you a wonderful introduction and talked about you growing up in the Montefiore home. And I thought that would be a wonderful place to start. And when you reflect on your growing up there, how did that help you develop validation?
Well, we lived right in the home. We had 5 rooms, and then there was a hallway and another 5 rooms. And right across the way, the hallway, was one of the residents, Mrs. Liu, and she and I became very good friends. And we developed a way of communicating. The nurse did not want me to bother Mrs. Liu. I was a little kid. So when the nurse left, Mrs. Liu would tap like 3 times on my door, and I knew that it was safe. And then I would creep out, and this was at nighttime, and Mrs. Liu would meet me, and we would walk outside and go to the drugstore, Strike's Pharmacy at the corner, and we would have an ice cream soda. And we would walk a little bit, and I had a great time with Mrs. Liu until one day we were having a soda. We were really enjoying ourselves, and I heard a voice saying, "There she is." And that was the nurse's voice. And she had 2 policemen with her, and they picked us up. And the next time I saw Mrs. Liu, she wasn't the same person. They had given her shock treatments, so she couldn't talk, and she just stared into space. And this was my friend. And I loved Mrs. Liu. And she had been a buyer, a very successful buyer for clothing, ladies' clothing. She was a very high class lady. And I really respected her and admired her and adored her. And then she became a living dead person, and I couldn't communicate with her anymore. So I was a little kid, well, not little, I was about 12 or so. So I learned that medication for people who don't know where they are anymore is very cruel. And Mrs. Lou could talk. We communicated. The only thing is she didn't know, she couldn't pass a mini mental test. She didn't know where she was anymore, and she lived her own life, which was fine. We had a great time. So I learned empathy with Mrs. Lou. And when I saw her after she'd had shock treatments and and medication was just beginning, then I learned early on to respect the old person who has lost memory and not use medication at all if possible, but rather.
And that is really the first principle of validation, which is every human being, oriented or disoriented, is unique and worthwhile. And we should accept them the way they are.
That's right. Also, that every human being needs to communicate.
Yeah.
If you don't, without stimulation of any kind, people just sit there and then they forget where they are. They haven't talked. There's been nothing to stimulate
Right.
mental communication. So they end up shutting down and they end up living dead people. And in so many nursing homes where I was at the time, I saw rows and rows of old people sitting there with a television set blaring away.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the validation method that you developed, the germ of it came out of your experience with Mrs. Lou.
That's
And then
right.
you went, and then you came back to the Montefiore home. I believe it was 1960, 1961. And you started working again, but this time as a social worker.
That's right.
And then you met people like Mrs. Gogolick and Mr. Rose.
Well, Mr. Rose he's the one that really taught me validation. Because he had a cane and he would yell night and day, "God damn hair doctor, son of a bitch." And he was alluding to the administrator, Dr. Weil. And
Your father.
my father, yes.
Yeah.
So they put him in this. My father had started a special service department for those people who couldn't communicate anymore in the present time.
Right.
They talked, but they were in their own world. And he called it a special service department, and he had more nurses there to work with the people. And so that's where I worked. And that's where they put Mr. Rose. And my father was a very authoritative person. He was German and had the German culture and background. And I was about in my early 20s, and I was rebelling still from authority. So when Mr. Rose said, "God damn son of a bitch, Herr Doctor," I said, "Yes, right on, Mr. Rose. God damn son of a bitch." And so I had empathy with Mr. Rose because he was swearing at my father and I was going right along with him. And I found out that when I did that, his swearing lessened. And eventually he stopped swearing. He stopped being so angry. So I learned that when people can express their anger, and if someone listens with empathy, and I empathized with Mr. Rose because I was mad at my dad as well. And we had a very genuine, empathetic communication. So he didn't have to yell so much.
Right. And I think the other thing you learned from him was that there's always a backstory, that the reasons for his behavior came out of his past. Right?
I looked at the history of Mr. Rose, and when he was little, and I spoke with his sister,
Right.
she told me that when he was little, his father locked him up in the attic to punish him. And so when he was raising his cane against my father up in the attic, he said that my father was castrating him up there.
Right.
Going back to his childhood, where his father had hurt him, and my father, that's when I learned about symbols. The symbol is a person in present time, like my father, that substitutes for someone in the past. And so my father was substituted for Mr. Rose's father. So finally, in his old age, he was in his 80s, he was able to express his anger against his father. And he was able to die much more in peace. Actually, he was healing himself. So I found out that when people get angry or when they cry, and they're expressing their unmet human needs, and somebody has to listen to them. And if nobody listens, they withdraw, and then they become living dead people, like Mrs. Lou did.
Mm.
And we don't want our nursing homes filled with living dead people. That would be horrible, because more and more people are getting older now.
Well, I think your heroic efforts through the 70s and 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, all the tours that you did, over 2,000 tours around the world, has really helped shift the gestalt of caring for older people. The way we think about it in this field is totally shifted. So
thank you, Vicki. That makes me feel very good. At my age, almost 90, I think that when you say that, I feel that my life has been worthwhile and I've contributed to the field.
And you have for sure made a huge shift from thinking about warm, fed, and clothed to what are looking at the person through their eyes. That was the big shift that you made.
And the weight of the disease model, because what was being propagated or told, that the dementia, so-called memory loss, is a disease,
Right.
which needs to be researched. And we need money to research this disease. Now,
Well,
I don't think that you can prevent aging or the destruction of brain cells. Like my vision has changed as I get older. My whole body has changed as I get older, and that my brain is part of my body. And so that has changed. I don't think that's a disease.
I agree with you. And I also think it's super important to differentiate between normal aging, which includes some cognitive decline, as well as other types of decline. But we need to separate that from, there are true illnesses. There is an Alzheimer's disease that is a biological process, or vascular dementia. That's a physical process. But what your focus has always been on are the very old people. And here's where we can get very clear about the population that responds best to validation is older adults who have lived relatively normal lives, do not have an illness, whose symptoms are related to cognitive decline, but are experiencing cognitive decline due to changes that happen in your brain and your eyes and your body as you get older. Am I right?
Yes, Dr. Alzheimer, in 1906 it was, I believe, he was doing an autopsy of a 51-year-old lady, and she had all these plaques and tangles all over her brain. And Dr. Alzheimer said, this is not normal. This woman is too young, 51. If she was 91, her brain could have deteriorated normally with age, but not at 51.
Right.
This is a disease. So Alzheimer's disease was originally found to be for younger. By younger, I mean people in their 50s and 60s.
Well, what you always said was, when it's not age appropriate, then
Right.
it is a disease process. But when people change, and you, in your workshops, you would often talk about, you know, when adolescents act out, we don't get scared and say, oh my God, we have to fix this. We say, oh, they're an adolescent, they're acting out.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy.
So age appropriateness as well, instead of, I think that's another big important step that we all need to take.
That's,
Let me move on to another question, if I may. And that is, you ready?
yeah.
What are the goals of validation?
Well, I think the main goal is to reduce the anxiety of the person and to give them a sense of self-respect and communication with the world around them, a feeling of belonging, that they are loved, they're not alone.
Right. Right. And can you talk a little bit about the difference between working with people who are expressing themselves verbally versus people who express themselves non-verbally?
Well, the goal is the same. The goal is communication and the feeling of being loved. But when people can't talk anymore, then the worker has to use touch. And that's a substitute for words. So if I'm crying, I'm 90 years old and crying, the worker comes and touches me very gently, cautiously, not too quickly, because some people resent touch. Very gently, starting with the fingers slowly up the arm, up and gently to the side of the face, very gentle, where the mother touched the child. And then very often that triggers the feeling of being loved by your mother, that it's where the mother, you were kind of nursed up there. And so the eyes will open and the person will smile. And sometimes the person will start to talk and say, I love you.
You also talk about the other nonverbal techniques, singing, for instance, or saying the emotion with emotion. These are all nonverbal techniques that are part of validation.
That's right. If someone is crying, you gently touch them where their mother touched them, and you pick up their emotions genuinely, and you would say to that person, "You are so sad. You really want to cry." And then that person feels that somebody is really with them
Right.
and cares about them.
It's like what you did with Gladys.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a great example of that. For those in the audience who have not seen the Gladys video, I strongly encourage you to go to YouTube and check it out. And all you have to do is type in Naomi Feil and Gladys, and it should pop right up, because it is the best description of validation I think that's out there. So what do you need in order to validate somebody?
The most important thing is you have to be self-aware. You have to be honest with yourself. So if someone is yelling and swearing, and I was taught my whole life that swearing is bad, I have to be aware. This is my background of not swearing. My father slapped me every time I should ever say a swear word. So I learned that swearing is bad. Those are my values. That's not the values of this old person. So I have to be very honest with myself. If people are exposing themselves, which sometimes they do, women take off their clothes and expose their breasts. And I was taught that's very bad to expose yourself. I need to be aware. This is what I was taught, my values. This old person in front of me has now a different set of values. So I need to put my, I can only think
Thoughts and feelings and everything on the side.
Yes, I think of the Yiddish word mishugas.
Yeah.
I should have to put that away.
Right.
Tune into where this old person is at.
Right.
And look at
and we call that centering in validation, and that's the first most critical technique of all, is becoming open so that we can actually take in the other person visually and with all our senses. So centering and being able to put your own feelings and thoughts and values aside. And then you need to be able to observe, right?
Right, absolutely. Yes, you look at the eyes, if they're closed and the tears are coming out. The breathing is very important. If the person is breathing very fast and the words come out very clipped, that person is very angry. So I know their emotions. And the breathing rapid, and the lower lip is tight, the chin is jutting out, they're making a fist. They're walking, they can walk, and they walk with very tight movements.
Right.
That person is angry.
Right. And so before you even begin talking to them, you know where they are.
That's
emotionally speaking. You
Right.
used to always call that taking the emotional temperature.
That's right.
Yeah. And then, of course, knowing the person and their history is critically important.
Right.
Whenever possible.
If I start hitting out at another woman sitting next to me, and you look at my history, and you find out that I have a sister of whom I was very jealous. You ask my children, And they explain that I have a very pretty sister who had a lot of boyfriends, and they tell you that their mother didn't have any and she was fat and ugly. And so now in my old age, the old lady next to me becomes a symbol, a substitute for my sister. So I hit out at her like I wished I had done with my sister.
Right. Right. So knowing that history helps us understand the reason behind the behavior.
Right. That's very important.
Right.
I think it's most important that there's always a reason behind the behavior.
And the next principle following that one is often the reason behind the behavior is connected to one of the basic human needs. And in validation, one of those needs is to resolve unfinished business. That it comes up, it bubbles up in very old age, the need to die in peace.
Right. The people are trying to heal themselves because
Right.
they had to soar their whole life with my sister. So now in my old age, I want to heal. I want to express my feelings.
Right. So how do we as caregivers help that lady who's hitting out?
By empathy
Mhm.
into their world. You are so angry, Mrs. Feil. You want to hit Mrs. Goggolick. Did she hurt you? And then I would look at you. Yes, she hurt me. She was mean. And I'm really talking about my sister. But I stopped hitting the other old lady. And I am now communicating verbally my feelings, which is your goal, that I don't act out by hitting, but that I can talk about it. I can express it.
Right.
And in expressing it, I'm healing myself.
Right. Because when, and now we're back to another validation principle, when painful emotions are expressed, they lessen.
That's very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
True sexually, not only, but if when I've been repressing my sexual feelings my whole life, and now in my old age, I unbutton my blouse and expose myself. This is I'm trying to heal.
Yeah.
So
Do you feel comfortable talking about Ed in that way?
yes,
Because Ed was your husband,
I,
and he had cognitive decline for the last 10 years of his life.
yeah.
And
Did he
go ahead.
did he ever expose himself? I don't remember that he did.
No, he got grabby.
He grabbed people with his hands. Yeah. Well, he used his hands in his works. You know, he was a filmmaker, and the camera in his hands were like one entity of his life.
Right.
So grabbing, I think, was equal to filming for him.
But he also expressed his sexuality more.
As he aged, yes, he
Right.
did.
And that had to do with sort of a loss of those filters.
Controls,
Yeah.
loss of control. Yes, he did more and more.
Yeah.
Because he'd
How
always,
did,
the more I find that the more people keep in their feelings when they're younger, the more they have to express them when they get old.
a lesson for us younger people.
Right.
The next question is pretty fun. How does validation differ from redirection or therapeutic lying? And I do that under therapeutic because I know you have strong feelings about that.
Well, first of all, anyone that has studied psychology 101 would not want to lie. Lying is not a part of any intervention. It certainly is not therapeutic. Maybe it is helpful to the worker because it closes up the relationship. If I say, I have to go home now, I have to see my mother. Sweetie, your mother's coming. She'll be here in a few minutes. Just sit down. Everything's going to be just fine. And let's go. As you see out there, those are the cherries on the tree. Let's go pick some cherries. That would be diversion, lying, and diversion.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'll go with you and pick the cherries, but I'll come back. I want to see my mother. And you have to go through all over again. Lying is not only harmful to the old person, but harmful to the worker. Because in order to really be, quote, therapeutic, you have to be genuine. You have to have respect for this old person. And when you lie to someone, I think it implies that you have no respect for them. But
I
yeah.
think some people have difficulty understanding the difference between stepping into the reality of the older adult and pretending or acting. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Maybe we could role play it.
Okay, that's probably a good idea.
And then maybe it becomes clearer.
Okay.
We had thought of where you might play the older adult and I might play the caregiver or the
Okay.
daughter.
Okay.
And do you want to do I have to see my mother or you stole my wedding ring?
Either one. Which one do you want to do? We can do both real quick.
You choose.
Okay. You stole my wedding ring and I want you to give it back to me, please. You have no right to take an old lady's possessions.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I'm going to go give it back to you right now.
Okay. Where is it?
I'm going to go get it.
Where'd you put it?
Well,
you're a liar. You know that? You're a son of a bitchy liar.
Woo-hoo-hoo. Okay. So that was a lie because I didn't really take your ring. Right?
Right. In fact, I have it on my finger, probably. Well, I did it myself.
Right. So now let's do it the validation way.
Okay.
All right.
Why did you steal my wedding ring?
Your wedding ring?
You heard me the first time. My wedding ring. It was a gold wedding ring that my husband, God rest his soul, gave me.
You're missing your wedding ring and from your husband?
Right, because you stole it from me. You're jealous of me because I got married, you didn't. You never got married, you're just a spinster. And I want my wedding ring back.
When did your husband die?
Oh, he died so much. 5 years ago, he died. Bed. And his last voice was, I love you, darling. I love you. And he was my love, my whole life. And I want my my wedding ring because he gave it to me. He gave it to me, my wedding ring.
You must miss him so much.
I miss him a lot.
Yeah.
And when we were married, we went all over the world together. We did everything together. He was such a good man.
Yeah.
He was so good. He worked so hard. And he was a good dad. He meant very well. And I loved him a lot. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the validation way instead of therapeutic lying or lying. You want to do the other one and show the difference between validation and redirection?
Okay. Like I want to see my mother.
Sure.
I have to see my mother. Excuse me. I have to go now because my mother is waiting for me.
You know, I understand completely. I've got some things for all set up for you, a nice activity that we can do together. I think you're going to have a great time.
Well,
Will you come with me over here?
I can't because I have to find my mother first. Once I find my mother, I'll come back. But I need to go and see her. So would you please let me out of this room to find my mother because she's waiting for me.
Right, right. Well, we can certainly wait for your mother. But I've got all this wonderful stuff. See, look over there. They're playing music and
I just want to see my mother because she's waiting for me. She's, baby, baby. She always had a high voice, baby. And that's what she's calling me. And mother, I have to come to go see her. I don't want her to die alone. I do not want her to die alone. And she is dying, my mother. Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, we'll try again another time.
I want to see my mother. Why don't you go away?
Okay, cut. That didn't work at all. Redirection did not work at all with this woman.
Right.
So let's see if validation might help.
Okay. Excuse me, but I have to find my mother now because she's waiting for me.
Where is she?
She's outside, right outside that door. And she wants me to come so we can go shopping together because I have to buy a new dress. And she said she would buy it for me.
What's the new dress for?
Well, I'm going to be married pretty soon. So I'm meeting my boyfriend and I want to look pretty for him. He's so handsome, my boyfriend. So I want to look good for him. That's why I need a new dress.
And your mom always went shopping with you?
Yes, she always knew what I should wear. She exactly the color. It was soft blue. So, oh, she was a good mother.
She had an eye.
My mother?
Yeah.
She knew what would look good on me. Always did. My mother really cared about me. She did. Yes.
What did she look like?
My mother, she had brown eyes and she had a lovely smile. And oh yeah, she was, you look a little bit like her, you know?
Really?
Yeah, you smile a little bit like my mother. Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I like you so much because you look like my mother. Yes, that's good. She's a sweet mother that I miss her a lot. And she never spanked me, ever. But my father did. He spanked me a lot.
It's hard when you lose your parents.
I know.
Yeah.
My dad was very strict. very, very strict. But I still miss him because I know he loved me and he wanted the best for me.
Mm.
He was a very strong man, my father. Everybody loved him because he had a good heart. He had a good heart. Even when he spanked me, it was always for a good reason.
Mm.
Yeah,
And now you have a cat.
I have a cat. Yes, you can see my cat.
I can see your cat.
Yeah, my cat jumps in my lap
Nice.
because my cat knows that I miss my mother. So she is comforting me. She's a very smart cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, she says, don't cry. Everything's going to be okay. And she wants me to pet her. She knows that'll make me feel better. Yeah, she's a very sensitive cat.
Okay. Now, out of the cut the role play.
Okay,
That went really well,
okay.
don't you think?
Yes,
Yeah.
don't you think so? Yeah, I do.
Well, I hope for everybody who's listening that we were able to tell you a bit about validation if you didn't know it already, some of the basic, most important principles, and how validation is so very different from some of the other methods that are used. And some of the goals about, boy, we covered a lot of stuff in 3/4 of an hour.
Everyone is really enjoying the session, and they just think that you guys are explaining validation so well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so lots of really good feedback. So we've got one question that came in that asked, can you guys return next year?
Sure.
With the cat, of course. What's the cat's name?
What's your cat's name?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that. I just call her Cat. But my children, my grandchildren, call her Yuki. But I don't call her Yuki. I just say Cat. And she knows what I mean. I didn't realize you could see her. She is a very sensitive cat. She heard me crying, and that's why she came over when I was role playing the crying. That tells me my crying was real.
That's wonderful.
And now she's gone because I'm not crying anymore. Yeah.
So
There we go. We've got one other question that's come in. Do you think that redirection can be used alongside validation?
Well, if I say I want to go home, I have to see my mother, and you would use validation and say you miss your mother. She was always with you. Yes, and I can talk about my mother and how she helped me. When I'm finished talking about her as much as I need to, then you might say, did your mother like to play bingo? My mother, she didn't like bingo at all. Yes, she did not like bingo. Oh, no, but she did play cards. She played gin rummy. Oh, would you like to play gin rummy? Oh, yeah. You want me to teach you? That might work. But it has to come indigenously from the person.
Thanks, Naomi. That's very clear. So I would just like to say thanks to both of you. That was an amazing session, and I know everybody really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks from the bottom of our heart for joining us today at our conference. Really appreciate it.